I walked away from my dull husband for a man who made me feel alive. Can you imagine the gut-wrenching moment you realize you threw away everything good, all because you mistook peace for boredom and chaos for passion? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and the regret, it still feels like a physical ache. I left my husband, Daniel. Not for another man, not really, but for a feeling. A hunger for something I thought was missing, something fiery and intense. I was so wrong. Daniel and we were married for 6 years. We met in our mid-20s, and honestly, everything about us was just easy. He was this calm, steady, utterly reliable force. An accountant, he'd come home like clockwork every day. We'd have dinner, watch our shows, go to bed at the same time. Our weekends were quiet. Farmers markets, bookstores, cooking together. He'd read, I'd scroll. Sometimes we wouldn't talk for hours, but we were always there in the same room. For a long time, I found such comfort in that. But around year 4, something started to shift. My coworkers, they talk about their wild weekends, spontaneous trips, passionate arguments with their partners. And I had nothing. Daniel and we never fought. We never even raised our voices. Everything was just calm, all the time. And I started to resent him for it. I convinced myself that calm meant he didn't care. That steady meant he wasn't passionate about me. I wanted fireworks, intensity, someone who'd fight for me, even if it meant fighting with me. Then Ryan came into my life at a work conference. He was Daniel's polar opposite. Loud, spontaneous, utterly unpredictable. He made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. My heart would actually race when his name popped up on my phone. I started comparing everything Daniel did to Ryan. Daniel's quiet, I love you in the morning suddenly felt boring. Ryan's random text, can't stop thinking about you, felt exhilarating. I even started picking fights with Daniel, just to see if he'd react. He never did. He'd just ask what was wrong, how he could help. And that made me even angrier. I wanted him to yell. I wanted proof he cared enough to be jealous or angry or anything other than just calm. When I finally told him I wanted a divorce, he didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just sat there for a long time, and then he asked, so softly, if there was anything he could do to change my mind. I said no. He asked if there was someone else. I lied and said no. He just nodded and said, okay. That was it. No fight, no begging. To me, it was confirmation. He didn't care enough to even try. The divorce was quick, painless. He only asked for a few things that belonged to his late mother. 2 weeks after the papers were signed, I moved in with Ryan. And for the first few months, it was everything I'd wanted. Passion, intensity, spontaneity. We'd stay out until 3 a.m., argue about stupid things, and make up dramatically. I felt alive, truly alive, for the first time in years. But then the excitement became exhausting. The spontaneity meant I never knew if he'd show up when he said he would. The intensity meant small disagreements would blow up into screaming matches that left me utterly drained. I started missing the quiet dinners, the predictable evenings, the calm, steady presence of someone who was just there. Then last month, I went back to my old house to grab some boxes from the garage. Daniel wasn't home, so I let myself in with the key I still had. The house looked the same, but it felt emptier. I grabbed my things and was about to leave when I saw a small notebook on the kitchen counter. I knew I shouldn't, but I opened it. It was a journal. Daniel's journal. He'd never once mentioned it during our entire marriage. I flipped to a page from 3 years ago. He wrote about loving to watch me read on the couch, even when I didn't notice him. He wrote about memorizing how I take my coffee, 2 sugars, just enough cream to turn it light brown so he could make it perfectly every morning without asking. He wrote about being scared he wasn't exciting enough and how he was secretly planning a trip to Paris for our anniversary because he wanted to see my face light up again. Then I found the entries from the week I asked for a divorce. He wrote that he knew something was wrong for months, but didn't know how to fix it. He wrote that he thought about fighting for me, but didn't want to trap me in a marriage that made me unhappy. He wrote that letting me go was the hardest thing he ever did. But he loved me enough to want me happy, even if it wasn't with him. I sat there on his kitchen floor and I cried for 2 hours straight. I cried for the man who loved me so quietly, so completely, while I called him boring. I cried for the marriage I'd thrown away, chasing chaos disguised as passion. I finally understood. Daniel did fight for me. He fought by waking up every single day and choosing to love me, even when I made it impossible. I drove back to Ryan's apartment. He wasn't home. He hadn't told me where he went. I sat alone in the dark and realized the life I truly wanted was the one I'd already had. That night, I texted Daniel. "Can we talk?" I asked. 3 days later, his response arrived. One word. No. I stared at my phone, at Daniel's single word glowing on the screen. No. Just that. 3 days of agonizing waiting for 2 letters that felt like a door slamming shut in my face. The rejection settled in my chest, heavy and, I knew, utterly deserved. Ryan still wasn't home. I'd called twice, texted once, asking where he'd gone, but nothing. 3 months ago, that would have felt exciting, mysterious, like he was too busy living life to check his phone. Now? It just felt disrespectful. It felt like proof that I'd traded someone who always answered for someone who couldn't be bothered. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's handwriting, describing how he memorized the way I took my coffee. 2 sugars. Just enough cream to make it light brown. He made it perfect every single morning for 6 years. And I never once thanked him because I thought that's just what people did. Ryan doesn't even know if I prefer coffee or tea. I realized, lying there in the dark, that I'd never actually told him because he's never once asked. Not once in 6 months has he asked what I like, or how I take things, or what truly matters to me. I got up, made myself coffee at 2 a.m., adding 2 sugars and cream, and cried into the cup. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't stop crying. My boss sounded annoyed, but I just didn't care. I sat on the couch in the same clothes from yesterday, staring at my phone, waiting for Ryan to come home. He finally showed up at noon looking tired, smelling like cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. He seemed annoyed that I was still there. He said he crashed at a friend's after the bars closed. I asked why he didn't text me, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He said it wasn't a big deal, and he didn't have to check in like some kid with a curfew. I asked which friend, and he just said, "You wouldn't know them," before heading to the shower. I spent the day rereading Daniel's journal entries from the photos I'd taken on my phone. I knew I shouldn't torture myself, but I couldn't stop. One entry from our 4th anniversary made me physically sick. He wrote about spending weeks planning a surprise weekend trip to the vineyard where we had our first date. He called around to find the exact table we sat at that day, booked the same room at the bed and breakfast. He wrote about wanting to see my face light up again, like it did when we first met. I never went on that trip. I'd asked for the divorce 2 weeks before our anniversary. He never mentioned any of it. He just let it all go, probably losing the deposits, and never said a word. Ryan found me crying on the couch later that afternoon and asked what was wrong. I tried to explain about the journal, what I'd found, how I was realizing what I'd thrown away. He cut me off halfway through to complain about his day. His boss was being difficult. His friend owed him money. The bartender last night was slow. I sat there, listening to him talk, and realized we'd been together 6 months, and he'd never once asked me a question about my marriage. He didn't know how long Daniel and I were together. He didn't know why it ended, beyond what I told him at the start. He'd never asked about my life before him, because he didn't actually care about anything that didn't involve him directly. The next day, I called Arno from work. He was the only friend who stayed neutral during the divorce, never taking sides. Everyone else chose Daniel or me, and stopped talking to the other. Arno just said he loved us both and hoped we'd figure things out. I asked if he could meet me for coffee after his shift, and he said yes immediately. I was so grateful to have someone who would listen without judgment or telling me "I told you so," even though, God, I deserved both. Arno met me at the coffee shop near his office at 6 p.m. I told him the whole story, going back to the house, finding the journal, reading Daniel's words, realizing what I'd done. I showed him some of the entries I'd photographed and watched his face as he read them. He handed my phone back, looked at me, and said, "You've been talking about Daniel for an hour, but you haven't mentioned Ryan once, except to say where you're living." Then he asked me gently, "Did you leave your husband, or did you just run away from yourself?" That question haunted me for days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. I kept replaying what Arno said, and realized he was right. I had blamed Daniel for my own restlessness, my dissatisfaction with my life. He was never boring. I was bored with myself. I was unhappy with who I was, what I was doing. And instead of dealing with that, I made it his fault. It was easier to project everything onto someone who wouldn't fight back, someone who would just ask what was wrong and how he could help. I punished him for being stable when the real problem was that I couldn't stand my own company. I tried to talk to Ryan about our relationship, where it was going. I waited until he was in a good mood and suggested we have a real conversation. He deflected immediately, saying we should go out and do something fun instead of having a heavy talk. I pressed the issue. I really needed to discuss some things. He got annoyed, accusing me of being too serious, killing the vibe we used to have. He said I'd changed since we moved in, that I wasn't fun anymore. I pointed out that wanting to communicate isn't being serious, it's being an adult. He rolled his eyes and left the apartment. I started noticing things about Ryan I'd been ignoring in the haze of new relationship excitement. How he interrupted me constantly. How he never remembered things I told him about my day. How every plan we made revolved around what he wanted to do. The spontaneity I found so attractive was really just him refusing to consider anyone else's schedule or preferences. He didn't plan things because planning would mean thinking about someone other than himself. He didn't ask about my day because he genuinely didn't care. The intensity one craved wasn't passion. It was just selfishness, loud enough that I mistook it for something real. I threw myself into work because it was the only place my brain stopped replaying Daniel's journal entries on a loop. My desk became a fortress where I could hide behind spreadsheets and project timelines, pretending my personal life wasn't falling apart. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for extra assignments. Being busy meant not thinking. My boss, Sarah, stopped by my desk one afternoon. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You've been unusually quiet." I forced a smile. "Fine, just focused on the quarterly reports." She looked like she didn't quite believe me, but nodded. "Let me know if you need anything." I couldn't tell her the truth. Admitting what I'd done felt impossible. How do you explain destroying a good marriage chasing something that turned out to be absolutely nothing? 2 weeks later, the thought of Daniel consumed me. I told myself not to call him again, but one morning, I woke up and grabbed my phone before I could talk myself out of it. I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail, without even connecting. I tried again, thinking maybe it was a network issue. Same result. The realization hit me, hard and sudden. He blocked my number. He actually blocked me. My hands started shaking so badly, I dropped my phone. The finality of it made my stomach turn, and I had to run to the bathroom, dry heaving over the toilet for 5 minutes. I couldn't catch my breath, my chest felt tight. This is what panic feels like. I splashed cold water on my face, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the person staring back. I texted Sarah. "Sick. Need to leave early." She responded immediately, "Feel better. Don't worry about the meeting." I drove home in a daze, crawling into bed even though it was only 2 p.m. Ryan announced on Wednesday that he was going on a weekend trip with college friends. He didn't ask if I wanted to come or if I had plans. He just told me he was leaving Friday morning and would be back Sunday night. I reminded him I had a huge presentation Monday morning that I'd been preparing for weeks. "Can't just take off," I said. He shrugged. "That's fine. Wasn't really inviting you anyway, it's a guy's thing." I asked where they were going. He was vague. Just somewhere upstate. Friday came, and he left without saying goodbye because I was already at work. I spent the weekend preparing my presentation, trying not to feel pathetic about being alone. Saturday afternoon, I made the mistake of checking social media. Ryan had posted photos from a bar. He was with a group of people I'd never seen before, and half of them were women. One woman in particular was in every single shot, her arm around his shoulders or her hand on his back. The caption, "Old friends and good times." I stared at the photos until my vision blurred and I felt sick again. I closed my laptop and walked to the bedroom, pulling out a box of old photos shoved under the bed. I hadn't looked at these since I moved in with Ryan. It hurt too much. I sat on the floor, going through pictures from my marriage. There was one from our 3rd anniversary dinner, Daniel smiling at me, not the camera. His expression was so peaceful, so content, it made my chest ache. I used to think that smile meant he was bored or checked out. Now I saw it for what it was. He was happy, genuinely happy, just being there with me. I found another from a farmer's market, both of us holding bags of vegetables, grinning like idiots. I remembered that day. We spent 2 hours wandering, then went home and cooked together. It was perfect, but at the time, I convinced myself it was boring. Exciting couples didn't spend Saturday mornings buying produce, I'd told myself. I flipped through more photos and saw the same thing over and over. Daniel's calm presence, which I mistook for lack of passion. His steady reliability, which I interpreted as him not caring enough to fight. I was so wrong about everything. Monday after work, I met Arno at the coffee shop. I'd been texting him updates about Ryan, the block number, everything falling apart. He listened as I explained about the weekend photos, how I'd spent 2 days alone looking at old pictures. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said something that caught me off guard. He suggested I talk to a therapist. He was worried about how much I was struggling. He thought I needed professional help processing all of this. I wanted to be defensive, but he was right. I couldn't handle this on my own. Talking to friends wasn't enough. I needed someone objective who could help me understand why I made the choices I did. That night, I logged onto my insurance website and searched for therapists. I found one, Charlotte Dubois, specializing in relationship issues and life transitions. Her first available appointment was next Thursday at 6 p.m. I booked it before I could change my mind. Ryan got back Sunday night, acting like nothing happened. He walked in, dropped his bag, and immediately started talking about how great the trip was. He didn't ask about my presentation or my weekend, or if I was okay. I waited until he finally paused for breath, then I asked about the woman in all his photos. He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand why I'd even bring it up. "That's just Anna," he said. "She's been friends with the group since college. You're being weird about it." I pointed out she had her hands all over him in every single picture. He rolled his eyes. "You're being jealous and controlling. I thought you were cooler than this." The word controlling made me want to laugh. It was so backwards. I'd left Daniel partly because I wanted him to show jealousy, to care enough to be possessive sometimes. Now, Ryan was accusing me of the exact thing I once craved. I didn't have the energy to fight about it. I just walked away. Thursday came. I drove to Charlotte's office after work. The waiting room was small, quiet, with magazines nobody ever reads and a white noise machine humming in the corner. Charlotte came out to get me. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her office was comfortable in that deliberately calming way therapist offices always are. She asked me what brought me here, and I started talking about the journal. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her everything. The divorce, Ryan, going back to the house, reading Daniel's words, realizing what I'd thrown away. I told her about the blocked number, the weekend photos, how I felt like I was drowning. Saying it all out loud made it real, in a way that just thinking about it didn't. When I finished, I felt exhausted, raw. Charlotte didn't offer easy answers or tell me what to do. Instead, she asked questions that made me think about things I'd been avoiding. She asked why I believed Daniel didn't care when he showed up for me every single day. She asked what I was really looking for when I started the affair with Ryan. She asked if I'd ever truly been comfortable with peace and stability, or if I always needed chaos to feel alive. The questions followed me home and kept me up that night. I started recognizing patterns I'd never seen before. I'd been chasing feelings instead of building something real. I confused emotional chaos for depth and mistook stability for shallowness. The intensity with Ryan felt like passion, but it was really just drama disguised as connection. Daniel's calm presence felt boring, but it was actually the foundation of something solid. What do you actually want from a relationship? Charlotte asked during our second session, and I realized with horror that I didn't know anymore. I thought I wanted fireworks and spontaneity and someone who would fight with me. But now I saw that what I really wanted was someone who showed up consistently, who remembered how I took my coffee, who planned surprises weeks in advance because they wanted to see me smile. I wanted what I'd already had.
And destroyed.
Ryan stayed out all night on a Tuesday without texting me once. I didn't hear from him until he walked in Wednesday afternoon, smelling like beer and someone else's perfume. I was past the point of being hurt or angry. I just felt tired. I asked him calmly if he could please text me when he was going to stay out all night because I worried when I didn't hear from him. He exploded. He said I was trying to change him into someone boring and predictable, and he wasn't going to let me control his life. I heard myself defending basic communication as a relationship necessity, and I realized how low my standards had fallen. I was literally asking for the bare minimum, for him to send a text letting me know he was alive, and he was treating it like I was demanding he check in every hour. This was our worst fight yet, and it ended with him storming out again. As I sat on the couch in the empty apartment, I understood with complete clarity. This relationship was over. I was just too afraid to admit it out loud yet. My phone rang Friday morning while I was getting ready for work. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. A woman's voice said my name and asked if I had time to talk. "Who is this?" I asked. "Eloise Morel," she said. "Daniel's older sister." My stomach dropped so fast I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. Eloise and I were never close, but we were always polite at family gatherings. I assumed she was calling to yell at me for what I'd done to her brother, and I couldn't blame her. But her voice was calm, almost gentle. She asked if we could meet for coffee sometime this week. I was too curious, too desperate for any connection to Daniel, to say no. We agreed to meet Saturday morning at a cafe downtown. I showed up at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, too nervous to wait at home. The place was small, quiet, with exposed brick and mismatched furniture. I ordered a tea I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands, and sat near the back. Every time someone walked in, my stomach dropped, but it was never her. I checked my phone 3 times, even though only 5 minutes had passed. I was about to text her when the door opened, and Eloise walked in. She looked exactly like I remembered, except maybe a little older around the eyes. She spotted me, waved, went to the counter to order, then came over. She sat down, smiled, a genuinely kind smile. And I immediately felt like I was going to cry. She said Daniel had told her about my text and his response. And she wanted to check on me because she knew finding that journal must have been devastating. The fact that she was being nice to me, when she had every right to be angry, made something break open in my chest. I started crying right there in the middle of the coffee shop, and I couldn't stop. She handed me napkins from the dispenser and didn't say anything while I tried to pull myself together. Other people were looking, but she didn't seem to care. When I could finally talk, I apologized for falling apart. She waved it off. She told me Daniel was doing okay, that he'd been seeing someone casually for a few months and was focusing on himself and his hobbies. The words hit me harder than they should. I knew he would move on eventually, but hearing it confirmed made it real. She said he'd taken up woodworking, went hiking most weekends, joined some kind of book club. He sounded happy, stable, like he was building a life that had nothing to do with me. I should feel happy for him, but instead, I felt like I was losing him all over again. Like the door that was already closed just got locked from the inside. Eloise must have seen something on my face, because she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said gently that Daniel had loved me completely. Anyone who read that journal would know that, but he wasn't the same person he was during our marriage. She explained that losing me changed him, in ways both good and difficult, that he'd learned to set boundaries and protect himself, which is why he said no to talking. She wasn't trying to be cruel, she was just being honest. And somehow that made it worse. Asked if she thought he'd ever be willing to hear me apologize. She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Honestly, she doesn't know." But then she added something that stopped me cold. "You shouldn't apologize to make yourself feel better. Apologizing is supposed to be for the person you hurt, not for your own relief." She suggested I focus on understanding why I made the choices I did, instead of seeking absolution from the person I hurt. The words settled over me like a weight. She was right. I'd been so desperate to tell Daniel I was sorry because I wanted to feel less guilty, not because it would actually help him. We sat there for another hour. She told me stories about Daniel as a kid. How he was always the calm one, even when their parents were fighting. How he learned early to keep his feelings quiet. She used to worry he would end up with someone who took advantage of his steadiness. And when he married me, she thought maybe she was wrong. Then she stopped talking and just looked at me. And I knew what she wasn't saying. That conversation with Eloise, it shifted something in me. I realized I'd been so focused on losing Daniel that I hadn't actually examined the person I was when I was married to him. 2 days later, I went to see Charlotte. And for the first time, I wasn't talking about Daniel.
I was talking about me.
Charlotte helped me explore the deeper dissatisfaction I was feeling and why I'd blamed it on my marriage instead of addressing it directly. She asked what I was like before I met Daniel, and I realized I didn't really know because I'd always defined myself through relationships. I jumped from one person to the next without ever sitting still long enough to figure out who I was on my own. Charlotte wrote something down and asked if I noticed a pattern.
Suddenly, I did.
I started recognizing patterns from before I even met Daniel. Things I'd been doing my whole adult life without seeing them clearly. I'd always gotten restless when things were going well. Always created chaos when life felt too stable. Always mistaken intensity for intimacy. The fights with Ryan that felt passionate at first were really just me recreating familiar dysfunction because peace made me uncomfortable. This wasn't about Daniel at all. It was about me never learning to be at peace. Never developing the ability to sit with contentment without sabotaging it. Charlotte asked why I thought that was, and I didn't have an answer yet. But, at least now, I was asking the right questions. Ryan sensed I was pulling away emotionally, even though I hadn't said anything. He responded by being extra attentive for about 3 days, texting me, asking how I was doing, suggesting we cook dinner. For those 3 days, I almost convinced myself things could work, that maybe he was capable of being the partner I needed. Then, on the 4th day, he reverted to his usual self, disappearing for an entire evening without explanation. The temporary effort just highlighted how little genuine care existed between us, compared to what I'd had with Daniel. Daniel showed up consistently, every single day, for 6 years. Ryan could barely manage 3 days of basic consideration before getting bored and checking out. I found myself doing small things that Daniel used to do, without even thinking about it. I made my coffee the exact way I liked it, measuring out the cream and sugar precisely instead of just dumping things in. I started reading in the evening instead of scrolling my phone. Actual books, with pages I had to turn. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning and bought fresh vegetables, even though it would have been easier to just go to the regular grocery store. These quiet rituals, which I once found boring, now felt like coming home to myself. Like I was remembering who I was before I convinced myself I needed constant excitement to feel alive. Charlotte asked, during our next session, what I was getting from my relationship with Ryan. I had to really think about it. The honest answer was distraction. Distraction from my own guilt and self-hatred. I was staying because leaving would mean admitting I destroyed my marriage for nothing. But staying was destroying what was left of my self-respect. Every day I stayed with someone who treated me like an option instead of a priority. I was proving to myself that I didn't deserve better. Charlotte didn't tell me what to do, but she asked what I would tell a friend in my situation. And I knew the answer immediately. Arno took me out for my birthday the following week because he knew Ryan wouldn't remember. We went to a nice restaurant, and he asked, "Are you happy?" I opened my mouth to say yes, but I couldn't.
It would have been a lie.
I couldn't remember the last time I felt actual happiness, instead of just temporary excitement or relief from anxiety. Arno didn't push, but he held my hand across the table and said, "You deserve to be happy. Really happy." And staying in a relationship that makes you miserable isn't going to fix what you're running from. I knew he was right, but knowing something and being ready to act on it are two different things. I woke up on my birthday morning, and Ryan was already gone. No note. No text. Nothing to show he remembered what day it was. I'd mentioned it at least 3 times that week, casual comments about turning another year older. But he just nodded and kept scrolling. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, waiting for something, a text, a call, him to walk through the door with flowers. But my phone stayed silent. By noon, I was angry at myself for expecting anything different. Daniel used to start planning my birthday weeks in advance, dropping hints about surprises, making sure the day felt special, without me having to ask for it. Ryan came home around 3 p.m., and I asked if he knew what today was. He looked confused for a second, then shrugged and said he forgot. When I told him I was hurt that he didn't remember my birthday, even though I'd mentioned it multiple times, he got defensive. He said birthdays weren't a big deal, and I was being materialistic for expecting him to celebrate. The words hit me wrong because it wasn't about gifts or money. It was about him caring enough to remember something important to me. I went to the bedroom and closed the door.
I didn't want to fight about this.
I didn't want to have to explain why basic consideration matters. My therapy session with Charlotte the next week felt different because I was finally ready to be honest. She asked me the same question she'd been asking for weeks, in different ways. What advice would you give a friend in your situation? I opened my mouth to deflect, like I usually did, but instead I heard myself say, I'd tell her to leave immediately. I'd tell her she deserves basic respect and consideration, and that someone who forgets her birthday after she mentions it multiple times doesn't care about her. Charlotte waited quietly while I processed what I'd just said. I realized I'd been unable to apply that same wisdom to myself because leaving Ryan meant admitting I destroyed my marriage for nothing. It meant facing the fact that I traded a man who loved me completely for someone who couldn't remember my birthday. The clarity hurt worse than the confusion did. Charlotte asked what was stopping me from taking my own advice. I didn't have a good answer. Just fear, guilt, and shame that I let things get this bad. That night, I told Ryan we needed to talk seriously about our relationship. He was on the couch playing video games, and he didn't even pause when I sat down. I waited until he died in whatever game he was playing, then I said, we can't keep going like this. He immediately got defensive, said I'd changed, that I'd become negative and exhausting. Anger rose in my chest. I'd barely asked him for anything. I pointed out that asking for basic communication and respect isn't negativity, that wanting my boyfriend to remember my birthday isn't being demanding. He put down the controller and looked at me like I was being unreasonable. He said, maybe we want different things, and there was this challenge in his voice, like he expected me to back down and apologize. For the first time, I agreed with him completely. Yes, I said, we do want different things. And I'm done pretending that excitement and chaos are substitutes for actual partnership. I told him I needed someone who showed up consistently, who remembered important things, who treated me like a priority instead of an option. He seemed shocked that I was the one ending it. His face went blank for a second, then he asked if I was serious. I've never been more serious about anything, I told him. He expected me to keep chasing him forever, to keep accepting the bare minimum while he did whatever he wanted. The look on his face when he realized I was actually leaving was almost satisfying. But mostly, I just felt tired. And sad that it took me this long. Ryan moved out within a week. The apartment was always more mine than his, and he didn't have much stuff. Just clothes, gaming equipment, some kitchen things. I helped him pack because sitting in silence while he did it alone felt worse somehow. He kept making comments about how I was going to regret this, how I'd realize I made a mistake and come back. I didn't respond. There was no point arguing. When he carried the last box to his car, this huge wave of relief washed over me. The apartment felt bigger, quieter, without his chaotic energy filling the space. Being alone was scary, but it was better than being with someone who made me feel lonely. I locked the door behind him and sat on the couch in the silence. And just breathed, for the first time in months. I spent the first week after the breakup not trying to fix anything or jump into something new. No dating apps. No going out with friends. No distracting myself with work projects. I just sat with my own company and learned to be okay with quiet. The silence that used to terrify me now felt like space to finally think clearly. I woke up and made my coffee exactly how I liked it. I read books in the evening instead of watching TV. I went to bed when I was tired instead of staying up, because someone else wanted to. The small routines felt good in a way I forgot was possible. I wasn't happy yet, but I wasn't drowning either. And that felt like progress. Arno helped me move to a smaller apartment that I could afford on my own. The place I'd shared with Ryan was too expensive for one person, and I didn't want to stay somewhere that reminded me of my mistakes. The new apartment was smaller, but it had good light, and it was in a quieter neighborhood. Arno carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaining and helped me assemble furniture. I picked out everything slowly, intentionally, instead of just filling space with whatever was convenient. A blue couch, because I like blue. A small dining table, because I might want to have people over someday. Plants for the windowsill, because taking care of something living felt important right now. The fresh start felt symbolic of rebuilding my life without running away from myself. Charlotte and I worked on identifying my triggers for restlessness in our sessions. She helped me see the pattern of how I got uncomfortable when things were calm and stable, how I created problems when there weren't any real ones to solve. We developed healthier ways to handle dissatisfaction than blowing up my entire life. I was learning that boredom is sometimes just peace, that my brain got trained to mistake drama for excitement and calm for apathy. When I felt restless now, I'd go for a run or call Arno, or work on a puzzle instead of picking fights or making destructive choices. It's hard work and I mess up sometimes, but I'm trying. Charlotte says that stability isn't the same as stagnation, and I'm starting to believe her. I wrote a letter to Daniel that I didn't intend to send. Charlotte suggested it as a way to process everything I wanted to say without expecting anything from him. I sat down one night with a notebook and started writing, and I couldn't stop. The letter became dozens of pages of apology and understanding, and grief for what I destroyed. I wrote about reading his journal and finally seeing how much he loved me. I wrote about all the ways I took him for granted and mistook his steadiness for indifference. I wrote about Ryan and how I thought chaos was passion until it nearly broke me. I wrote about learning to sit with quiet and realizing that Daniel was right all along about what matters. When I finished, my hand was cramping and my eyes were swollen from crying, but I felt lighter somehow. I folded up the pages and put them in a drawer. Maybe someday I'd send it, or maybe I wouldn't. But writing it helped me understand what I lost. 2 months after finding the journal, I saw Daniel at the grocery store. I was in the produce section, trying to remember if I needed onions, when I looked up and he was standing near the tomatoes with a woman. She was pretty, laughing at something he said, and he looked happy and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. My stomach dropped. This must be the person Eloise mentioned. I froze, my hand on a bag of carrots, and just watched them for a second. He picked up a tomato and showed it to her, and she nodded, and he put it in their cart. It was such a small, normal thing, but it hurt to see him doing it with someone else. Then he saw me. His expression closed off immediately, and the easy smile disappeared. We made eye contact across the produce section, and I could see him deciding what to do. He nodded politely, just this small acknowledgement that I existed, and then turned away and kept shopping. The woman didn't seem to notice anything happened. I stood there, holding my carrots, while they walked toward the checkout. And I knew I just saw my future. A life where Daniel is happy without me, and I have to learn to be okay with that. I drove home with tears running down my face, my hands shaking on the wheel. The image of Daniel looking happy with someone else kept playing in my head, over and over. I pulled into my parking spot and just sat there, crying for 20 minutes, because seeing him move on made everything feel so final. Part of me knew he would eventually, but watching it happen in real life is different from imagining it. When I finally went inside my apartment, I felt empty, but also weirdly calm. Like something clicked into place. I can't have him back, and I need to accept that instead of torturing myself with what-ifs. The grief was still there, but so was something else. This quiet understanding that his happiness doesn't erase what we had, even if I destroyed it. The next Saturday, I saw a flyer at the coffee shop about volunteers needed at a community garden. I took a photo of it on my phone. I needed to do something with my weekends besides sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I showed up the following week, and a woman with dirt under her fingernails handed me gloves and showed me how to prepare soil for planting. The work was slow and repetitive, turning earth, pulling weeds, watering seedlings that wouldn't grow for weeks. I found myself thinking about Daniel while I worked, how he used to tend the herbs on our kitchen windowsill with the same patient care. Growing things takes time and attention and consistency. All the things I used to dismiss as boring. I went back every weekend. My hands got calloused, my back ached, but watching tiny green shoots push through the soil felt like proof that slow growth still counts as progress. Have you forgiven yourself yet for what happened with Daniel? Charlotte asked me during our next session. I sat there for a long time, trying to figure out how to answer. I wasn't sure forgiveness was even the right word for what I'd done. Some mistakes feel too big to just forgive yourself and move on like nothing happened. I told her I didn't know if I should forgive myself, that maybe I needed to carry this for a while longer. She leaned forward and said something that surprised me. Understanding why you made those choices and learning from them matters more than beating yourself up forever or letting yourself off easy. Guilt that leads to growth is useful, but guilt that just makes you hate yourself helps nobody. I wasn't sure I believed her yet, but I wrote it down in my journal to think about later. Eloise texted me out of nowhere one afternoon, asking how I was doing. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. I still couldn't believe Daniel's sister wanted anything to do with me. We texted back and forth a few times, and she told me she knew I was struggling with guilt about everything. Then she said something that made me cry right in the middle of the grocery store. Holding on to guilt forever doesn't honor what Daniel and I had together. She told me the best apology isn't words. It's becoming someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes again. I thanked her and told her I didn't deserve her kindness. But she just sent back a heart emoji. Having any connection to Daniel's family felt like more grace than I'd earned, but I was trying to accept it instead of pushing it away. I looked at myself in the mirror one morning while getting ready for work and realized I was different from who I was 6 months ago when I left Daniel. My face looked the same, but something behind my eyes had changed. I wasn't the person who thought excitement mattered more than stability anymore. But I also wasn't yet the person I wanted to become. Changing patterns I'd had my whole life was hard. Uncomfortable. Some days I wanted to quit. I'd catch myself getting restless when things were calm, and I'd have to actively work on sitting with that feeling instead of creating chaos. Charlotte says, growth isn't linear and you'll mess up sometimes, but what matters is that you keep trying. For the first time in my life, I was committed to actually doing the work instead of running away when it got difficult. 3 months after finding Daniel's journal, I opened my laptop and wrote him an email. I didn't ask to meet or talk or get back together. I just told him I understood now what I'd thrown away, and I was genuinely happy he was moving forward with his life. I wrote that I hoped the woman I saw him with appreciated him the way I should have. I apologized for the hurt I caused, without making excuses or asking him to forgive me. The whole email was maybe 6 sentences long. I read it 20 times before hitting send. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. I didn't expect a response. And when days passed without one, I wasn't surprised. Sending it wasn't about getting something back. It was about being honest for once, instead of hiding behind excuses. My boss called me into her office the following week, and I was scared I was in trouble. But instead, she told me they were promoting me. The new position had more responsibility, better pay, and involved managing a small team. I was surprised by how excited I felt about the challenge instead of anxious. The restlessness I used to feel at work hadn't disappeared completely, but now I channeled it into learning new skills and taking on harder projects. I used to think being satisfied with my job meant I was boring, but now I understood that finding meaning in work is actually valuable. I thanked my boss and went back to my desk, feeling proud of myself for the first time in months. Arno invited me to his book club the next Thursday, and I almost said no because it sounded like exactly the kind of thing I used to dismiss as boring. But I remembered Daniel loved book clubs and quiet conversations about ideas, and I'd never given those things a real chance. I showed up at Arno's apartment, where 6 people sat around talking about a novel I hadn't read. They were nice about catching me up, and the conversation was smart and deep, without anyone trying to show off or dominate. These people had real connections with each other, built on shared interests and genuine care, not drama or intensity. I left feeling like I actually enjoyed myself instead of just killing time. I went back the following month, and the month after that, slowly building friendships based on the kind of quiet compatibility I used to think was worthless. I was getting coffee one Saturday when I saw the couple who introduced me and Daniel sitting at a corner table. They noticed me at the same time, and their faces got awkward and uncomfortable. I walked over before I could talk myself out of it and told them honestly that I messed up my marriage and I was working on being better. They relaxed a little and invited me to sit down. We ended up talking for an hour. They mentioned Daniel seemed really happy lately, doing well at work, and I told them I was genuinely glad to hear it. They seemed surprised that I meant it, but I did. I want him to be happy, even if it's not with me. When we said goodbye, they hugged me and told me to take care of myself. It felt like maybe I didn't burn every bridge after all. Charlotte and I talked about my patterns in relationships during our next session, and she helped me see something I'd been avoiding. I was searching for outside validation and excitement because I didn't have a strong sense of who I was as a person. I used relationships to define me instead of building my own identity first. With Daniel, I was the wife of a steady, reliable man, and I resented him for it. With Ryan, I was the girlfriend of an exciting, unpredictable man, and I exhausted myself trying to keep up. Neither relationship was about actually knowing myself or what I wanted. Charlotte says, "The work now is developing that foundation you never had. Figuring out who you are when you're alone before you try to be part of someone else's life." I was scared because I was 32 and just now learning things I should have figured out in my 20s. But she reminded me that starting late is better than never starting at all. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center the following week. I'd always wanted to try it. Daniel used to say it was impractical when I mentioned it, and Ryan would have laughed and called it boring old lady stuff. The class met Thursday evenings in a small studio that smelled like wet clay and dust. The teacher showed us how to center the clay on the wheel, and my first attempts were disasters. The clay wobbled and collapsed, and I had to start over again and again. But there was something calming about the repetition, about learning to apply just the right amount of pressure at just the right time. By the third class, I managed to make a lopsided bowl that didn't fall apart. I took it home and put it on my kitchen counter, even though it was ugly and uneven. Creating something with my own hands through patience and practice felt like a metaphor for everything I was trying to do with my life. I went back every week and slowly got better at centering the clay and pulling up the walls without them collapsing. For months after finding the journal, I met Arno for dinner at a restaurant downtown. I parked on the street and walked toward the entrance when I saw Daniel's car in the lot. I stopped walking and just stood there on the sidewalk, staring at his old sedan with the dent in the back bumper from when I backed into a mailbox 3 years ago. He was inside that restaurant right now, having dinner with someone, probably the woman from the grocery store. My first instinct was to go inside and manufacture some reason to talk to him, to insert myself into his evening and his life. But I didn't. I turned around, texted Arno that I needed to reschedule, and got back in my car and drove home. Sitting alone in my apartment, I felt this wave of acceptance. Daniel had a whole life now that didn't include me, and never would again. It hurt, but it was also okay somehow. He deserved to have dinner with someone who appreciated him, without his ex-wife showing up and making it weird. I told Charlotte about seeing Daniel's car at my next session, and she asked what I did. When I explained that I left without going in, she leaned back in her chair and smiled a little. She pointed out that a few months ago, I would have gone inside and found some excuse to talk to him. I would have convinced myself I had a right to know who he was with and what he was doing. But now I was learning that love sometimes means leaving people alone to be happy without you. The words hit hard because they were true. I spent so long thinking love meant intensity and drama and fighting for someone. But real love is also knowing when to step back and let someone move on. Daniel choosing not to respond to my messages was him protecting himself and his healing. And the most loving thing I could do was respect that boundary, even though it was painful. Eloise texted me the next week, asking if I wanted to get coffee.
I said yes.
We met at the same place as before, and she told me Daniel knew she'd been in contact with me.
He was okay with it, she said.
He didn't hate me, but he wasn't ready for direct contact, and he might never be. I nodded and stirred my coffee, telling her I understood. Part of me had been hoping she would say he was softening, or that maybe eventually he'd be willing to talk. But hearing the truth was actually better than holding on to false hope. I thanked her for being kind enough to keep me updated when she had no reason to care about my feelings. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said she'd seen how much I was working on myself, and she respected that. Before we left, I asked Eloise if she thought Daniel read my email. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes, he read it. But he chose not to respond because answering would open a door he'd worked hard to close. She reminded me that accepting his boundaries was the most loving thing I could do now, even though it hurt. I wanted to ask more questions, but I didn't, because that would be using her as a way to stay connected to Daniel, and that wasn't fair to either of them. We hugged goodbye, and I drove home feeling sad, but also strangely at peace. I was learning to sit with the grief of losing someone without trying to fix it or make it better or force resolution. The holidays approached, and I spent them with my own family instead of trying to insert myself into Daniel's life through Eloise or mutual friends. My parents lived 2 hours away, and I drove there for Thanksgiving. My mom noticed right away that I seemed different. She said I was more present, more grounded, less distracted by my phone or whatever drama was always happening in my life. We cooked together and talked about real things instead of surface-level small talk. My dad asked how I was doing, and I gave him an honest answer instead of a fake cheerful one. On my last day there, my mom hugged me in the kitchen and said she was proud of the work I was doing on myself. I cried a little because I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. I wrote in a journal now, something I never did before. Every night before bed, I sat down and wrote honestly about my feelings, my patterns, the things I was learning in therapy. Some entries were about Daniel and the marriage I destroyed. Others were about Ryan and how I confused chaos with connection. More and more lately, they were about me and who I was trying to become. Reading back through entries from even a month ago showed me how far I'd come. I used to write the same things over and over, circling the same thoughts without any real insight. Now I could see patterns emerging and catch myself before I fell into old habits. The journal was evidence that I was changing, even when it didn't feel like it. Arno asked me over drinks one evening if I was ready to date again. I thought about it for a long time before answering. The truth is, I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed more time being comfortable alone before I risked falling into old patterns with someone new. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing to be single intentionally, rather than treating it as a gap between relationships. Every relationship I'd ever had was about filling some emptiness inside me, about defining myself through someone else's love or attention. I needed to figure out who I was on my own before I tried to be part of someone else's life. Arno nodded and said, "That's probably the healthiest thing I've ever said about relationships."
Then I saw it.
On social media, Daniel got engaged to the woman I saw him with at the grocery store. A mutual friend shared the announcement, and suddenly it was right there on my screen. Daniel, smiling bigger than I'd seen in years. His arm around a woman who looked at him like he hung the moon. The news hit harder than I expected, even though I knew he'd moved on. I let myself grieve for a full day, crying on my couch, looking at old photos, feeling the weight of everything I threw away. But then I got up, washed my face, and sent Daniel a message congratulating him. I told him genuinely that I wished him happiness, because he deserved everything I couldn't give him. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one, but sending it felt like the right thing to do. Charlotte asked at our next session how I was feeling about Daniel's engagement. I was able to say honestly that I was sad for what I lost, but happy he found someone who appreciated him. The ability to hold both feelings at once felt like real emotional maturity, instead of the black and white thinking I used to do. Before, I would have been either completely devastated or pretending I didn't care at all. Now, I could be sad for myself while also being genuinely glad that Daniel was happy. Charlotte said that's growth, that being able to hold complexity and contradiction is a sign of developing emotional intelligence. I woke up the morning after seeing the engagement announcement to a text from Eloise. Her message said she knew the news must be hard for me, even though I was doing better. And she wanted me to know she'd seen real change in me over these past months. She wrote that she was proud of the work I was doing, and she was rooting for me to find my own happiness. I sat on my bed, holding my phone, and cried. But this time the tears felt different. Less about what I lost, and more about being seen by someone who had every reason to hate me. Her kindness felt like more than I deserved. But I was trying to learn how to accept grace when it's offered instead of pushing it away, because I think I don't deserve it. I texted her back, thanking her for everything she'd done for me and telling her I was genuinely happy for Daniel. I meant it when I typed the words, which felt like proof that I was actually changing instead of just saying I was. The weeks passed, and I settled deeper into my new life, the one I was building on my own, without using another person as a foundation. My apartment stayed clean because I wanted it that way, not because someone else expected it. I cooked meals for myself and actually enjoyed the process instead of rushing through it. I read books in the evening and didn't feel guilty about the quiet. The farmer's market on Saturday mornings became my routine again, and I realized I never actually hated these things. I just hated myself and blamed it on my circumstances. I met Arno for coffee every Tuesday, and we talked about real things, not just surface-level complaints or gossip. He introduced me to his sister, and we became friends, and I was building a social circle based on actual connection instead of just filling time between relationships. Some days, I still woke up and felt the weight of everything I threw away pressing down on my chest. I let myself feel it instead of running from it or trying to fix it with someone new. I wrote in my journal about missing Daniel and the life we had. But I also wrote about understanding why I couldn't appreciate it then, and how I was different now. The grief doesn't go away, but it becomes something I can carry instead of something that carries me. I sat down one evening and wrote Daniel a final letter, the one I actually planned to send this time. I told him I saw his engagement announcement, and I was truly happy for him, not in a bitter or sarcastic way, but with genuine warmth for someone who deserves every good thing. I thanked him for the 6 years we spent together and for loving me as completely as he did, even when I made it nearly impossible. I apologized for the pain I caused, without making excuses or trying to explain away my choices. I didn't ask him to forgive me, or to respond, or to give me anything at all. I just wanted him to know that I finally understood what I had and what I destroyed, and I was grateful he found someone who could appreciate him the way he deserves. I read it over 3 times to make sure I wasn't asking for anything disguised as giving closure. Then I sent it before I could talk myself out of it. 2 weeks went by without a response, and I told myself that's okay, that I sent the letter for him, not for me. Then one morning, I woke up to an email from Daniel. It was short, just a few lines, but every word felt carefully chosen. He wrote that he appreciated what I said, and he was glad I was doing better. He said he hoped I found the peace and happiness I was searching for, and he meant that genuinely. He didn't say he forgave me. He didn't say we could be friends. And he didn't open a door to anything more than this single exchange. It wasn't the reconciliation some part of me still secretly hoped for. And it wasn't the complete absolution that would make me feel better about myself. But it was closure given with kindness. And it was grace from someone I hurt deeply. And I'm learning that sometimes that's enough. I can move forward now, carrying the hard lessons I've learned and the self-awareness I've fought to build. And I can hope that the person I'm becoming is someone who won't make the same mistakes again. The story of my marriage is over, and I can't change how it ended. But the story of who I am is still being written. Have you ever made a mistake that fundamentally changed your understanding of yourself and forced you to rebuild from the ground up? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd really love to hear from you.